Pirates had to patch cannonball holes while ankle-deep in seawater, using anything from captains' silk shirts to soggy bread as emergency plugs. One crew stuffed a 60-foot broken mast back together with 1,000 feet of rope in 3 days, but what happened when the rudder snapped off completely during a storm? Pirates weren't just masters of finding treasure. They were champions of emergency repairs. While most sailors today call tech support when something breaks, these guys had to fix massive ships with nothing but whatever they could steal. Here's how they kept their floating homes from becoming coral reefs. When you're a pirate in the middle of the ocean and a cannonball rips through your ship, you got bigger problems than spilled rum, though I bet plenty of pirates would argue otherwise. Picture this. You're standing on deck, probably hungover from last night's plunder party, when boom, a British Navy ship decides to turn your vessel into Swiss cheese. Now you're ankle-deep in seawater and the ocean's getting a free invite into your ship. Not exactly the morning swim you had in mind, right? The first rule of fixing a cannonball hole is simple. Anything that can plug that hole becomes more valuable than gold. I once heard about a crew that stuffed their captain's prize silk shirts into a breach. Let's just say he wasn't too happy about his fancy clothes becoming fish food. But hey, better the shirts than the whole crew. The champion in these situations was something called oakum. Basically old rope fibers soaked in tar. Pirates would always keep a good supply of this stuff handy because holes in ships were about as common as bad teeth in the 1700s. And trust me, that's saying something. Roughly 9 out of 10 sailors had some form of dental problems back then. The tar made it waterproof and the fibers expanded when wet. This created a temporary seal that could mean the difference between sailing home or becoming a permanent underwater attraction. But if stuffing things in the hole wasn't enough, pirates would resort to a technique called fathering. Imagine trying to patch a hole in your jeans, except your jeans are underwater and if you mess up, everyone dies. No pressure, right? They'd take a sail, cover it in tar and animal fat, then drag it under the ship like some sort of giant underwater band-aid. The pressure of the water would actually help press it against the hull, creating a seal. It was messy, dangerous, and about as elegant as a drunk parrot. But it worked. For holes above the waterline, pirates got to play carpenter. If by carpenter you mean someone desperately nailing planks of wood while probably getting shot at, they'd slap wooden patches over the holes faster than you could say incoming, then seal the edges with tar. Fun fact, the tar they used was actually pine tree sap that had been heated until it became thick and sticky. Pirates called it black gold because it was literally worth its weight in gold when you were taking on water. Some clever pirates figured out that bread made an excellent emergency plug for small holes. That's right, the same stuff you make sandwiches with could save your ship. The bread would swell up when it got wet, creating a temporary seal. Though I have to wonder about the first pirate who figured this out. Oh no, we're sinking. Quick, throw the sandwich overboard. Not exactly your conventional thinking, but when you're desperate, innovation takes some weird turns. The most dangerous part of all this is that while you're trying to patch up your ship, you're basically sitting ducks. Every minute spent hammering planks or stuffing holes is a minute you can't fight back. And let me tell you, there's nothing quite like trying to nail a plank straight while cannon fire whistles past your head. It's like trying to thread a needle during an earthquake on a boat while someone throws firecrackers at you. But perhaps the most impressive thing about these emergency repairs wasn't the techniques themselves, but how quickly pirates had to learn them. You didn't exactly get a training manual when you joined a pirate crew. It was all hands-on learning, usually in the worst possible conditions. Imagine your first day on the job and suddenly you're expected to know how to stop a ship from sinking using nothing but old clothes and tar. Talk about a steep learning curve. Of course, plugging holes was just the start of a pirate's repair worries, especially when the wind picked up and you heard that dreaded cracking sound from above. Every pirate's worst nightmare, the mast giving up on life. And trust me, when a 60-foot wooden pole that weighs as much as 3 elephants decides to call it quits, it's not exactly a quiet affair. There goes your afternoon nap and probably your entire week. You'd be surprised how often this happened back in the golden age of piracy. About 1 in every 4 ships suffered major mast damage during long voyages. Why? Because apparently Mother Nature thought it would be hilarious to test just how much wind a tree-turned pole could handle. Spoiler alert, sometimes not as much as you'd hope. Now, pirates had 2 options when a mast broke: replace it or fix it. Replacing sounds easier, right? Wrong. First off, spare masts were about as rare as honest politicians in the 1700s. Most ships couldn't even carry full-size spares because they took up too much space. Space that could otherwise be filled with more important things like rum, gold, or more rum. So what did they do? They got creative with repairs. And by creative, I mean they turned into maritime MacGyver. The first step was getting everyone to stop panicking and cursing, which, given that pirates weren't exactly known for their calm demeanor, was like trying to convince a cat to take a bath. Once that minor miracle was achieved, the real work began. The most common fix involved something called splicing. Basically, you're trying to convince 2 pieces of broken mast that they're still one piece. It's like relationship counseling for wooden poles. You take the broken ends, line them up just right, and start wrapping them with more rope than you'd find in a hangman's warehouse. Some clever pirates figured out that heating the ropes made them shrink as they cooled, creating an even tighter grip. If you were lucky enough to have iron hoops on board, these would get hammered around the splice. It was like putting a cast on a broken leg, except this patient was vertical and the size of a small building. The whole process took hours, and one wrong movement meant starting over. Or worse, watching your handiwork collapse and taking half the rigging with it. The biggest mast ever repaired at sea was on a Spanish galleon in 1742. The repair job took 3 days, used up nearly 1,000 feet of rope, and somehow stayed intact long enough for the ship to make it to port. The crew celebrated by drinking so much they couldn't climb the newly fixed mast for 2 days, though that might have been a blessing in disguise. The real test came after the repair was done. You had to raise the sail slowly, holding your breath and probably saying every prayer you knew in every language you could remember. It was like trying to fly a kite made of gold. You really didn't want it to crash. The whole crew would watch, waiting for either success or spectacular failure. There was no in between, but even if you managed to fix the mast, you still had to keep an eye on it. These repairs weren't exactly shipyard quality. They were more like maritime duct tape. Good enough to get you where you needed to go, but not something you'd want to bet your life on in a storm, though sometimes you don't have a choice. You know what made all this even more challenging? Trying to keep your balance on a rocking ship while doing all this repair work. At least the holes in the hull had the decency to stay at deck level. But mast repairs? That was like trying to do construction work on a tightrope during an earthquake. But even with a perfectly repaired mast, you weren't going anywhere if your sails looked like they'd been through a catfight. You haven't seen true despair until you've watched a pirate trying to sew a massive tear in a sail while the wind's doing its best to turn that same sail into the world's largest kite. It's like trying to thread a needle while reining a mechanical bull. Only the bull is in the middle of the ocean and your thread is as thick as a shoelace. The needles pirates used were no joke either. They were basically mini swords about the size of your hand and heavy enough to double as a weapon in a pinch. Fun fact, these sailing needles were so valuable that some pirates included them in their treasure shares. Imagine being the guy who got a needle instead of gold during the loot split. Talk about drawing the short straw. Sailors had a special way of sewing sails that they called palm and needle seaming. The palm part came from a thick leather pad they wore on their hands. Without it, pushing those monster needles through thick canvas would have turned their hands into something that looked like they'd arm wrestled a porcupine. Even with the palm protector, most sail menders had forearms like blacksmiths from all the pushing and pulling. A typical pirate ship in the 1700s carried around 7,000 square feet of sail. That's about the size of 3 tennis courts. And every single inch of that massive area needed to be maintained. The thread they used wasn't your grandma's sewing kit variety either. It was waxed twine, thick enough to hang your laundry on and coated with beeswax to make it waterproof. Some clever pirates figured out that coating the thread with tar made it last even longer, though it made the whole process messier than a toddler's first attempt at finger painting. But what happened when a sail was too far gone for repairs? That's when things got really interesting. Pirates were the original recycling experts. They'd cut down damaged sails to make smaller ones, or turn them into anything from clothes to bags. Some creative crews even made temporary shelters out of old sails during island stops. One famous pirate ship reportedly had a complete set of sail canvas hammocks for the entire crew. Talk about sleeping in your work. The real nightmare was trying to replace an entire mainsail. Ever tried to fold a fitted sheet? Now multiply that frustration by about 1,000. Add some waves and throw in a few angry seabirds who think your new sail is invading their airspace. That's what pirates dealt with when installing a new sail. Sometimes they'd resort to stealing bed sheets from captured ships. Because nothing says fearsome pirate quite like sailing under grandma's floral bedding. You might think all this sewing would be a peaceful activity, a nice break from all the plundering and pillaging. Wrong. Try concentrating on your stitches while the lookout's screaming about approaching ships. Or when there's a storm brewing that could turn your careful needlework into confetti. It was like trying to do delicate surgery during a boxing match. Did you know that some pirates became so good at sail repair that they could actually tell what ship was approaching just by looking at the patch patterns on its sails? It was like a criminal's version of reading fingerprints. Oh yeah, that's definitely Captain Johnson's ship. I recognize that terrible stitching job from the Battle of Bermuda, but even with the best maintained sails in the Caribbean, you weren't going anywhere if you couldn't control where those sails were taking you. Losing control of your ship because of a broken rudder was like trying to ride a blind horse that's had too much coffee. You might be moving, but good luck telling it where to go. And let me tell you, nothing sobers up a crew faster than hearing that sickening crack from the stern, followed by the wheel spinning freely like it's auditioning for a windmill. The rudder was basically a giant wooden paddle stuck on the back of the ship, and it had one job, steering. But boy, when it failed spectacularly. About 40% of all shipwrecks in the 1700s were caused by steering problems. That's right, almost half the ships that never made it home got lost because they couldn't turn properly. It's like trying to drive a car with no steering wheel, except the car is the size of a house and floating in the middle of nowhere. Sometimes the rudder would just get loose. That was the easy fix if you can call hanging off the back of a ship with a hammer easy. Pirates would have to nail it back in place with wooden pegs and iron spikes, all while trying not to become fish food. The real fun started when waves kept smashing against the rudder during repairs. One minute you're hammering away, the next you're getting a surprise swimming lesson. But when the rudder actually snapped off, that's when pirates had to get creative. They'd rig up what they called a jury rudder. Basically a heavy plank tied to the stern with more rope than you'd find in a hangman's annual convention. Getting this makeshift rudder to work was about as graceful as teaching an elephant to ice skate. It took at least 6 strong men to control it, and they had to coordinate like a synchronized swimming team, except with more cursing and less pointing of toes. The worst part wasn't even the physical labor, it was the math. Yes, you heard that right. Pirates had to do geometry. They needed to calculate the right angle for the temporary rudder, or they'd end up going in circles like a dog chasing its tail. Here's something that'll make you appreciate modern shipping. The biggest temporary rudder ever rigged was made from 3 dining tables lashed together. The crew had to sacrifice their eating space for 2 weeks while they limped to port. They ended up eating their meals sitting on cargo boxes, probably plotting mutiny between bites. Past the salt, and maybe we should have kept at least 1 table. The heroes in these situations were the poor souls who had to swim under the ship to attach ropes or check the damage. Remember, this was before scuba gear or even proper goggles. These brave pirates would dive down with a rope in their teeth, probably wondering if this was really better than their old job as a farmhand back in England. Some clever crews developed a system of pulleys to make steering with the jury rudder easier. But this often resulted in an elaborate web of ropes across the deck. Walking around became like playing the world's most dangerous game of hopscotch. One wrong step and you'd either trip a rope controlling the ship's direction or get tangled up like a fly in a spider's web. But hey, at least rudder problems kept you on your toes, literally, since you had to constantly adjust your balance as the ship wandered all over the place. The real headache came from the constant drip, drip, drip of water finding its way into the hull. You know, every wooden ship leaked. That wasn't a design flaw, it was just a fact of life, like taxes or bad weather during vacation. The average pirate ship took on about 200 gallons of water every day, which meant crews spent more time moving water out of their ships than most people spent watching TV today. Keeping up with the leaks was like playing whack-a-mole with water. Plug one hole and another one would pop up just to spite you. The pirate's secret weapon against leaks was something called caulking, which sounds fancy but really just means stuffing things into cracks until water stops coming through. The gaps between wooden planks were their worst enemy. Over time, they'd open up like a yawning mouth, letting in enough water to make even fish uncomfortable. The process of fixing these gaps was about as pleasant as a dentist appointment, only longer and wetter. Pirates used this stuff called oakum, old rope fibers soaked in tar to fill the gaps. But it gets interesting when the best oakum came from old ship's ropes that had been used for years. Why? Because these ropes had been soaked in salt water, tar, and who knows what else, making them perfect for plugging leaks. It's probably the only time in history when having old, worn-out equipment was actually better than having new stuff. The fun part is when they had to apply hot pitch over the oakum. Pitch was basically tree sap that had been heated until it became thick and black like molasses from hell. The smell was so bad it could make a skunk apologize, and it stuck to everything. Clothes, hair, skin, you name it. Some sailors swore their grandchildren were born with tar stains because of how much the stuff got into their blood. Pirates sometimes mixed animal fat into their waterproofing cocktail. They'd save every bit of fat from their meals for weeks, rendering it down to mix with the pitch. Imagine cooking dinner and instead of throwing away the bacon grease, you save it to fix your house. That's basically what they were doing. The record for the most animal fat used in one repair job was held by a Spanish galleon that reportedly used the equivalent of 50 pigs worth of fat. Talk about bringing home the bacon. The job of actually applying this goop was usually given to the newest crew members. Because apparently welcome aboard meant here's a bucket of burning hot tar. Try not to drop it on yourself. Working with hot pitch was like trying to paint with molten lava. One wrong move and you'd have a souvenir scar to remember it by. Some pirates got so covered in the stuff during repairs that their crewmates started calling them tar babies. Though you'd better believe those nicknames were only used behind their backs. But this wasn't a one-and-done job. Ships needed constant recaulking, especially in warm waters where the wood would shrink and expand like a breathing thing. A smart crew checked caulking every few weeks, which meant someone was always covered in tar. You could usually tell how well-maintained a pirate ship was by how many of its crew members had permanently black hands. Sometimes patching leaks just wasn't enough. And when that happened, there was only one solution: finding a nice, quiet beach where they could do some major repairs. Careening, as pirates called it, meant deliberately running your ship onto a sandbar or beach during high tide. When the tide went out, your ship would lean to one side, exposing the hull like a whale taking a sunbath. Did you know that ships in the 1700s had to be careened about every 4 months? That's because these wooden vessels collected more unwanted passengers than a free bus ride. Barnacles, seaweed, and these nasty little creatures called shipworms would stick to the hull. The shipworms were the worst. They weren't actually worms, but more like tiny clams that loved eating wood. A bad shipworm infestation could turn your hull into Swiss cheese faster than you could say abandoned ship. The whole process was like a twisted version of a ship spa day. First, they'd scrape off all the sea creatures, a job that probably made cleaning your shower look like a vacation. Some ships collected up to 2 tons of barnacles. Then came the really fun part, checking every inch of the hull for damage. Any spots that looked suspicious got the full treatment. New planks, fresh oakum, and enough tar to make an oil company jealous. But here's the catch. While your ship was getting its beauty treatment, you were basically sitting ducks. Pirates had to post lookouts everywhere because nothing says perfect target quite like a ship stuck on its side on a beach. The famous pirate Bartholomew Roberts once lost his ship to the British Navy during careening. Talk about bad timing. It's like getting caught by your parents while dyeing your hair blue. The work itself was no picnic either. The entire crew had to help, and it was all done under the burning sun. They'd coat the entire hull with a mixture of pitch, tallow, and something called sulfur. A combination that smelled worse than a middle school locker room after gym class. But this cocktail of stinky stuff was like sunscreen for ships. It kept the nasty sea creatures from making your hull their all-you-can-eat buffet. Some clever pirates came up with a ranking system for beaches good for careening. The best ones had deep water close to shore, lots of trees for cover, and fresh water nearby. The worst ones? Well, let's just say more than one crew had to abandon their repair job halfway through because someone spotted Navy sails on the horizon. Nothing motivates a repair crew quite like the sight of enemy ships. Suddenly, everyone becomes a master carpenter. This might seem like a lot of work just to keep a ship floating, but that's exactly what made pirates so impressive. They kept their ships running with nothing but ingenuity, determination, and enough cursing to make a sailor blush. Which, when you think about it, they already were.